Good morning, everyone. I will wait a few more moments for everyone to connect.
Miss Kenzie, just so you know, Miss Germanario won't be able to join us today, so there's no need to wait for her. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, I'll go ahead and get started. Good morning. It's January 19th, 2024. I'm Hearing Officer Nicole Kinsey with the Administrative Hearings Office of the State Water Resources Control Board. And this is a continuation of the hearing on the pending petition for change by the City of Solvang of Water Right Permit 15878, which authorizes diversions of water from the Santa Ynez River in Santa Barbara County. This hearing is being conducted by Zoom web conference and is also being broadcast live on the AHO YouTube channel. Both the audio and video are being recorded, and we will post files of this recording along with the Zoom-generated transcript to the AHO FTP site. The YouTube recording will also be available on the AHO YouTube webpage. If at any time you're experiencing technical difficulties trying to communicate with us, please send an email to the AHO at admin.hrgoffice@waterboards.ca.gov. AHO staff are monitoring that email inbox and can let me know. Assisting me today are the usual team from the Administrative Hearings Office. We have Skylar Anderson, Kyle Wooldridge, and Nicole Mullen. Ms. Mullen will be handling the screen sharing of exhibits today and moving along of the slides. So if you're our witness, I guess that would be you, Mr. Nicely. You can simply ask Ms. Mullen to advance to the next slide when you're ready. And attorneys, you may ask Ms. Mullen directly to please bring up a particular exhibit when you are ready. If at any time I'm experiencing technical difficulties during the hearing and I'm not able to rejoin the Zoom conference within a few minutes, one of my staff will call a recess until I'm able to rejoin you. We will take breaks. I'm not sure how long we'll go for this hearing today, but we will take breaks, and if necessary, we will take a lunch break as usual. I can't imagine we'll go until 5 p.m., but if we do, we'll stop before 5 p.m. I'd like to go ahead and move to appearances. I think we're going to have some new faces or maybe some substitutions, as I recall from last time. So to do for appearances, I'll identify as usual each of the entities. And if you are representing that entity today, please unmute your microphone and state your name. And I will start with the City of Solvang.
Good morning, Chelsea O'Sullivan from Richards, Watson, and Gershon for the City of Solvang.
Thank you. Good morning, Ms. O'Sullivan.
Good morning, Officer Kunze. Tilden Kim, also with Richards, Watson, Gershon for City of Solvang.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Kim.
And Taylor Fawn, Richards, Watson, and Gershon for the City of Solvang.
Thank you. Good morning. And do we have anyone from Alisal Guest Ranch?
Good morning, Jessica Diaz with the law firm of Brownstein Hyatt Farber Schreck for Alisal Guest Ranch.
Thank you. Good morning. Santa Ynez River Water Conservation District, ID number 1.
Good morning, Gary Kavistad, ID 1.
Good morning.
And
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Elizabeth Esposito, also for ID number 1. Good morning.
Thank you. Good morning. Santa Ynez River Water Conservation District, that's the parent district.
Good morning, Brett Stroud of Young Wooldridge for the parent district.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Stroud. Kachuma Conservation Release Board.
I'm so sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm
Connor
going
O'Brien.
to keep late.
Sorry about that. Connor O'Brien, Young Wooldridge for the parent district.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. O'Brien. I'm sorry. I'm moving along. I've had coffee this morning. Kachuma Conservation Release Board.
Sam Bivens, Downey Brand for CCRB. Good morning.
Good morning. And National Marine Fisheries Service.
Good morning, Lori Beal with NOAA Office of General Counsel for National Marine Fisheries Service.
Thank you. Good morning, Ms. Beal. California Trout.
Good morning, Your Honor. Linda Kropp, the Environmental Defense Center.
Thank you. Good morning, Ms. Kropp. And California Department of Fish and Wildlife.
Stephen Puccini with CDFW's Office of the General Counsel for CDFW. Good morning.
Good morning. I think I went through everyone, but is there anyone else on the call other than our witness today who has not had the opportunity to introduce themselves? All right, I thought I would lay out where I think we are today and our goals for the day, and then you can let me know if I missed anything. I think the purpose of the hearing today is to hear first from Solvang Sir Rebuttal witness, Mr. Nicely, on the topics that I identified in my ruling of December 29th. And then we have this project of turning to the admission of exhibits. You may have seen I issued what I called an unformatted version of an evidentiary ruling on the remaining outstanding objections. I think I covered all of the remaining outstanding objections, with the exception of continuing to defer ruling on the collateral estoppel issue. So my intent there is any exhibits admitted today that are subject to one of those outstanding collateral estoppel objections would be admitted subject to those objections. And I would deal with those later. And those, again, I think the proper place for any argument would be in the closing briefs on that issue. I also wanted to remind you that I think I would like to continue to hear orally any hearsay objections to exhibits, but then I've also issued or set a deadline of receiving any hearsay objections in writing by the end of the day next Friday. And then the responses for those would be due the same day as closing briefs, February 15th. I think we also have a couple of outstanding requests for official notice that we can deal with today. And my intent would be to work through, for all of these, my intent is to work through the parties just one by one and accept offers of exhibits, hear any outstanding objections, and then accept exhibits into the evidentiary record. And then the last item on my list is the matter of the AHO exhibits. I think those need to be moved into the evidentiary record. And if there are any objections, I should hear those. So you can take a look, just a reminder that that is still on the list of things to do. I imagine we'll get through Mr. Nicely. We'll have a break and you'll have time to think about everything I just said and raise any other issues. But based on what I outlined for our agenda for today, are there other issues that we need to address that I have missed? Okay. So far, so good. So with that, I think I will turn to you, Ms. O'Sullivan. I think at this point, we would be appropriate to hear from Mr. Nicely. Are you prepared to call Mr. Nicely to present a summary of his Sir Rebuttal testimony?
Yes, thank you, Officer Kinsey. And just to confirm, Mr. Nicely has previously given the oath. And so it would be our understanding that that oath is carrying forward today. And so, Mr. Nicely, I present you as our witness today. And if you could just affirm that Solvang Exhibit 190 is a true or incorrect copy of your second Sir Rebuttal testimony, and that Solvang 198 is your corresponding presentation.
Good morning, and yes, those are both true.
Okay, great. And then,
and I'm sorry to interrupt, Ms. O'Sullivan, just for clarity, Mr. Nicely may also be presenting on, I'm looking at the index, didn't he have there's two Sir Rebuttal written testimonies, is that right?
Correct, I was just gonna go there. So I believe, Mr. Nicely, you're also presenting on the Kit Custis portion of your Solvang 187 errata, which is your first limited Sir Rebuttal. So if you can affirm that is the correct exhibit for that as well.
That's 187, right? That's right.
And the errata version of that.
There's a lot of overlap between the two. That's correct.
Yeah. Thank you, Ms. Kinsey.
And thank you. I'm sorry I got ahead of you again. I've had coffee.
No, as I was speaking, the thought occurred to me that I didn't include that in my notes. So we were having the same thought at the same time. So thank you.
All right, with that, I think if you're prepared and Mr. Nicely is prepared, we can go forward. And I think that Ms. Mullen, we're pulling up, correct me if I'm wrong, Solvang 198. Is that correct? Is that your presentation?
Yes, that's correct.
Great.
Thank you, Ms. Mullen. Great, thank you. So yeah, thank you for having me this morning. My name's again Tim Nicely, and I think Ms. Mullen, this will be the only presentation I'll need for this morning's presentation on the the second SIR rebuttal testimony. So, hello again. My name is Tim Nicely. I'm a geologist and hydrogeologist testifying on behalf of the city of Solvang as a reminder. And this morning I'll be summarizing my recent testimony, which provided two responses focused on two issues identified in the administrative hearing, ruling on evidentiary objections from December 12th. My second limited SIR rebuttal provides my responses to Mr. Custis's presentation of a document referred to as CDFW 125 that was admitted recently or presented recently, specifically regarding two issues that were brought up in that hearing order of December 12th. Firstly, I'll be addressing the concept of the subsurface capillary zone and the applicability to the Santinez River and its underflow. And then secondly, I'll be presenting on the depth of the subsurface water levels at which that underflow is disconnected from surface flow in the Santinez River, specifically in the relevant reaches of the river. I'm not going to attempt to address the conditions of the whole river, just this relevant reaches. Okay, so I'll be summarizing my responses in this presentation of these two concepts in only 4 slides this morning, which follow. So if we could go to slide 2, please, Ms. Mullen. Thank you. So the figure shown here is referenced by Mr. Custis from an abstract that was a presentation of that CDFW 125 document, which was titled, "What is a Disconnected Stream?" And this figure 1 introduces a capillary zone shown here in all 3 of these images, which I'll discuss. So capillary water is shown here is a zone of water that's drawn upward by capillary forces above the water table a short distance. The water table here is what we've been referring to as the subsurface water. This capillary water is not flowing and it cannot provide recharge to the river from the capillary zone water. So this is provided in context of a transition from the top to the bottom of a full flowing stream from a state of connection at the top to disconnection at the bottom as the water levels decline. So Mr. Custis correctly clarified that a river is disconnected when the capillary zone, as shown here on the bottom image, is below the riverbed elevation. In this disconnected state, steepage from the surface to the subsurface is constant. As I'll present this morning, the presence of a capillary zone does not affect streamflow. By Mr. Custis bringing up this issue in the context of this river, it seems that he continues to misunderstand the hydrology and hydrogeology here specifically. To back up, so water falls through this unsaturated zone as shown on the bottom out of the river at a constant rate to the underflow below or the subsurface water below. Such infiltration does not equate a hydraulic connection as shown on the bottom for determining the impacts from pumping of that underflow. So Mr. Custis's comparison of connected and disconnected infiltration rates based on this document is not relevant to the city's project in the relevant reaches of the Santinez River because it's predominantly disconnected in this reach. So further, Mr. Custis's assertions about the disconnected state, making seepage worse, as he said in his testimony, it misunderstands the ephemeral and dynamic nature of the Santinez River and seems to infer that drawdown from the city's project alone will make the Santinez River transition from a connected, as shown on the top, to a disconnected state. Recall, disconnection is the prevailing condition of this river in this stretch. And it's a condition that is not induced solely from drawdown from the city's pumping. Therefore, again, Mr. Custis's discussion is not relevant to the city's project. So on another note, neither Mr. Custis nor the document CDFW 125 provide any real mechanism by which pumping from the subsurface water, which is clearly disconnected from the surface flow, could affect stream flow, or the rate at which stream flow infiltrates into the unsaturated zone. Even the authors of the document CDFW 125 agree that when a stream is disconnected, and this is a direct quote, a further decline in the water table no longer affects the exchange rate. That's the end of that quote. So based on this, it seems that any connection referred to by Mr. Custis is instead more of a contribution of infiltration from the stream downwards, as shown on the bottom part of this image, 1C. Connection would require an interaction, but no mechanism exists for changes in subsurface water levels to affect stream flow while the two are physically separated. As I'll discuss a little later, the data from the long-term subsurface monitoring supports this. For purposes of evaluating the effects of pumping underflow, there's no hydraulic connection between a stream and underflow in particular stretches when the stream is in a disconnected condition. Now, the only mechanism that Mr. Custis offers to support his assertion that there's a hydraulic connection between the surface and subsurface is the concept of a capillary fringe, or capillary zone as it's shown here as the thin line between the water table and the unsaturated zone. However, the coarse sand and gravel in the San Ynez River cannot create a thick capillary fringe. A direct quote from one of the references I provided as several exhibits says that capillarity is not effective in coarse sediments, but water may migrate upward 10 feet or more in fine, well-sorted sediments. According to several authoritative hydrogeologic references I provided as exhibits, the maximum thickness of capillary fringe for the materials described on the nearby boring logs, which are cobbles with coarse sands and gravels, is likely only 0.1 to 0.4 feet thick. So the capillary zone shown here is the cap on these images in this area is likely only 0.1 to 0.4 feet thick. I provide more details in my testimony. Suffice it to say that the capillary zone, regardless of its position, has no effect on stream flow in the relevant reaches of this dynamic San Ynez River. So, in summary, on this specific point, the concept of subsurface capillary zone is trivial in the San Ynez River in this reach. So it's clear, once again, that the hydrology of the ephemeral San Ynez River is inappropriately being compared to perennial streams, connected perennial streams, as shown perhaps in the top part of the image. In fact, as with the Jenkins analysis, which we've discussed, and then the Wallace analysis further on, perennial stream hydrology forms the basis for the underlying analyses of that CDFW 125. So this CDFW 125 was an abstract, but the paper it referred to, it was included as a link in that document, explicitly describes why the analysis shown here is not relevant to rivers like the San Ynez. And the authors state in there that our analysis is also restricted to steady state conditions where stream levels rise and fall rapidly. Transient effects will be important. And they go on, steady state conditions are particularly unlikely to occur in intermittent and ephemeral streams. So I reiterate that perennial stream hydrology is not at all relevant here. So Ms. Mullen, if we could go to slide 3, please, the next slide. Thank you. So to this point, this figure is provided in my testimony. The top image in this figure provides what I believe is a more accurate description of the predominant condition of the San Ynez River in this relevant reach near well site B. And this condition, as the caption says, is typical of arid regions where the streams can recharge groundwater. And the San Ynez River in the relevant reaches of the river behave more like the upper portion of the figure than the bottom portion. And then finally, for some general statements about that CDFW 125, it was called "What is a Disconnected Stream?" It has several other limitations that are summarized more completely in my testimony. For one, this reference doesn't serve to authoritatively refute the general definitions of disconnected river found in scientific literature, as it states that it attempts to do. Rather, CDFW 125 provides general definitions that may be more or less appropriate and useful for different river systems. This isn't used as a reference that I rely on, and to my knowledge, the other qualified professional engineers and geologists that I regularly work with also don't use these analysis in their work on the San Ynez River. CDFW 125 emphasizes also, this is a minor point, the important role of a clogging layer, which was a dark line on the earlier diagram that we were looking at. A clogging layer, however, has not been observed in this reach of the San Ynez River, and therefore a clogging layer that was so central to that analysis has no relevance in the discussion of this river. Ms. Mullen, if we could then now go to the next slide. Thank you. And now on to the second point of that. I will address the other hearing issue about the depth of subsurface water levels at which the underflow is disconnected from surface flow in the San Ynez River, specifically in relevant reaches of the river. So to address this hearing issue, I prepared two hydrographs similar to that was already prepared by CDFW for the well near Site B. That was, recall, CDFW Exhibit 86. And we've discussed that at length previously. This is one of those two hydrographs that I prepared for the same well near Site B using the same data. And it was prepared along with another similar to it for another well downstream of well Site B. An upstream well hydrograph wasn't prepared because it's been established by me and then validated by Mr. Custis that the city's pumping will not affect subsurface water levels upstream of the Alisal Bridge, nor any other upstream well beyond that bridge. So the reason for creating these hydrographs is due to the discussion of Mr. Custis during his hearing of December 6th, when he discussed a transition of stream flow conditions from a losing reach of the river upstream from Site B to what he called a possible gaining downstream section. That's a valid consideration. Furthermore, as part of this discussion, Mr. Custis described another idea that the bottom of the river elevation and the groundwater is separating further and further downstream, and that causes more seepage. So to answer this, I used some of the plenty of water level data that are available to develop an accurate understanding of the hydrogeology downstream of Site B, specifically using the data from the USBR's 25 nodal wells, which extend from the dam all the way to the Lompoc Narrows. And they include the entire section of this river in the Buellton subarea that Site B is in. So this hydrograph shown here is from the well nearest Site B, as I said, and includes the same data as the previously referenced hydrograph CDFW 86. But my hydrograph adds the water rights orders when they occurred and they were implemented. It also adds the known well depth, and if we knew, the bedrock elevation, which is shown on the bottom here. The depth of the bedrock is shown relative to those other parts of the hydrograph. So before we look at the next hydrograph downstream, notice that from this hydrograph, as previously discussed, the recent subsurface water levels show that water levels since the issuance of order WR 8918, and indeed throughout the most recent severe drought, have been recharged by annual releases and maintained a high subsurface water level elevation. Nonetheless, this elevation has remained almost entirely above the riverbed elevation nearest the pumping site, indicating a dynamic river system that's been principally disconnected seasonally from the surface water and the underlying subsurface water from which this well pumps. And now,
I'm sorry to interrupt you, Mr. Knightley. Can you repeat that again? Because I want to make sure, did you mean above? Maybe try that. I just want to make sure the testimony is right on the record and I understood you correctly.
You bet. That was a direct quote from one of my earlier testimonies, that the elevation has remained almost entirely below the riverbed elevation. That's what I meant to say.
Thank you.
Nearest the pumping site. Thank you for the correction. Indicating that it's disconnected in this area. So, and then I'd like to look downstream. Can we look at slide 5, please, Ms. Mullen? My final slide. Thank you. Now, presented in a similar format is data from the next downstream well in the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation's nodal network, shown here. So this well is located about a mile downstream of the other well. And to me, it looks remarkably similar to the hydrograph for the well near Site B. Both wells are in the same Buellton subarea. And the well is located, recall, outside of the projected drawdown distance for my original testimony that was validated by Mr. Custis. So, based on my review of these two hydrographs together, it's clear that the hydrology of the ephemeral San Ynez River is similar near Site B as it is 1 mile downstream, as shown here. Therefore, it's my opinion that the city's project will not cause the area downstream of well site B to transition from a gaining connected stream to a losing disconnected stream, as asserted by Mr. Custis. So in summary, Mr. Custis's oral presentation of the transitional capillary zone concept seems to greatly overemphasize the role of a transitional flow regime and the capillary zone in this relevant reach of the San Ynez River by well site B. Disconnection is the prevailing condition already present in the relevant reach of the San Ynez River, with highly permeable coarse-grained sands and gravels and a semi-arid climate, and that disconnection is not something induced solely due to the city's project. Lastly, the city's project will not cause the area downstream of well site B to transition from a gaining or connected stream to a losing disconnected stream in the relevant reaches that could be affected by this project, as asserted by Mr. Custis. So with that, that concludes my presentation on the hearing issues, and I'd appreciate the opportunity to present this.
If I may, Ms. Kinsey, Mr. Nicely, I apologize because I think there was a little confusion, but if you could just also testify and summarize paragraphs 18 through 23 of your first SIR rebuttal, that's Solvang 187. And if you need a minute to just review those, perhaps we could take that time. If we could ask that, Ms. Kinsey. I don't know, Mr. Nicely, if you are ready, we can go, but if you need a minute to just, it's very short, but we do also need testimony on that part of your written testimony.
That's right. I was prepared to present that at the last time, and then it was tabled or continued until this, right?
Yes, that's right.
Great. Okay. I would be glad to. I don't have any slides for that, but I'd be glad to do that if we're ready to continue.
I'm prepared to continue if you need a minute, but if you're ready to go, then please go ahead.
You betcha. So I'll be presenting relatively briefly on testimony that's included in my Solvang 187. We don't need to include it, Ms. Mullen, but that's what I'll be summarizing here. So that was a response to the testimony of Kit Custis. So in his testimony, Mr. Custis presented a rebuttal testimony that provided new analysis that wasn't directly responsive to my direct testimony or any other direct testimony. And I'm going to provide a brief analysis of two elements of his rebuttal testimony related to his estimates of subsurface drawdown and stream flow depletion. So he presented, just briefly, he presented a TICE analysis that was designed to address the lack of this Mr. Demuha's TICE analysis in his direct testimony. And I utilized parameters, as did Mr. Custis, recall, that were derived from Stetson's technical memorandum number 6. It included elements from the city's project description and the addendum, and then the flow management requirements from the city of the San Ynez River, which were all available from outside of my direct testimony. They're all included in the exhibits that were provided. So the results of his analysis, while not exactly replicating my own, validated my TICE analysis, as I referred to in my earlier testimony, by reproducing the results of my analysis under less conservative assumptions, but that are reasonably similar to my results. I think he said that they were slightly more than half of my results. So his results estimated drawdown in a similar way for a similar period, and came up with 0.88 feet of drawdown, while my analysis predicted the drawdown would be about 1.7 feet at a specific distance upstream from well site B. Notably, his analysis as noted by Mr. Custis, my analysis estimates greater drawdown than his and therefore is more conservative. The reasons for the additional drawdown are because I used the image well analysis and a correction for the unconfined nature of the material. So operationally, what does that mean? The analysis is more conservative because the transmissivity, let me slow down. My analysis is also conservative because the transmissivity of the alluvium may be much higher than either he or I modeled, because the alluvium is as much as 50% deeper due to the total thickness of the aquifer, the underflow at well site B. So operationally, the city's wells will only pump at the maximum rates for 12 to 16 hours per day based on the city's water demands and the limited volume of the reservoir storage in the city's water system and their available pumping schedules for their wells. So I concluded in my own analysis that because of the disconnection of underflow from the surface flow, that the area of greatest drawdown effects would not be located below the river and therefore not substantially deplete water flow. But he had a statement in his testimony that during these specific periods with outflow in the river, pumping from well site B will result in drawdown in the elevation of the underflow beneath the San Ynez River. So he provides an estimate of stream depletion using the Jenkins analysis, and I think we've discussed the applicability of that analysis. And in my testimony, I give a lengthy discussion of the reasons why the Jenkins analysis of stream flow depletions are not applicable. There's several paragraphs about that in there. And then Mr. Custis's addition of a Wallace analysis, which recall is a time-based correction of a Jenkins stream flow depletion analysis, does not cure the problem of the applicability of the Jenkins analysis to this river. So I've said several times this morning, the hydrology of the San Ynez River is ephemeral and dynamic, and the water oscillates seasonally. It's been chronically below the riverbed elevation since 1985, as I've clarified a little more today. And under those conditions, again, decreases in subsurface water elevations don't deplete the overlying surface water to any additional degree. Lastly, those Jenkins and Wallace analyses account for the they do not account for the ephemeral and dynamic nature of the San Ynez River alluvium. So, in summary, Mr. Custis's conclusions about peak depletion rates provide neither an accurate nor meaningful assessment of the city's projects for these reasons. So that concludes my presentation on those two issues.
Thank you. I think with that, I'm going to ask a few questions. I may have some to follow up later, but and just to the best of your ability, I'll try to frame these. You can respond and I'll try to frame these appropriately. But do you have, Mr. Nicely, do you have an opinion about whether in the location of the gauge that's at Alisal Bridge, whether or not the surface water and underflow are likely disconnected in that area, which is upstream of well site B, as well? Do you have an opinion about that?
Sure, if I could just rephrase it to make sure I understand your question,
Yes,
if that's
please.
okay.
Thank you.
You're curious whether the location of the stream gauge where we can quantify stream flow is appropriate to determine whether surface flow and subsurface flow are disconnected. Then I lost it. Where?
No, so let me try again. I was a terrible question.
I'm sorry.
You've testified today, as I understand, about your opinion that the Santa Ynez is substantially or primarily, or you had a better word, mostly disconnected. But you were primarily looking at the well site B area and then downstream. And I was wondering if you have an opinion about connection or disconnection at the location of the Alisal Bridge gauge.
Oh, great. Thank you. Yeah, I missed that last part. I was taking notes. I can't write and listen at the same time, so pardon me. Yeah, so the river is definitely connected in places, right? In my opinion, is that in the upstream areas, the river is much more connected, where the river is narrower, bedrock confined, and comes up to the surface, specifically at that spot. That spot was I don't know this for sure, but it's likely chosen as the spot for the bridge because it's a narrow spot in the river. It is where the earliest people came, probably because of the water source. That's just a hunch, but it is definitely more connected in upstream areas. In the downstream connection as well, the river may, in the next sub-area down, 5 miles downstream of the Buellton sub-area, as we go into the next area downstream, it may very well transition to a gaining reach where the bedrock is higher, the riverbed alluvium is narrower, both of which have the effect of pushing the subsurface water upstream. So it's dynamic in time, as I've been clear, but I also believe it's dynamic along its reach. And there are certain reaches that tend to provide, the subsurface would provide water up into the surface water, and other places where it would fall out. Recall that comparing the Site B area to the area near the Alisal Bridge is several times wider and a whole lot deeper as well, making the total volume of that alluvium much greater. That has the effect of the water flowing downstream, passing the Alisal Bridge, which is a great place for a streamflow gauge, and then, in my opinion, falling out and filling up this large basin in the Buellton sub-area that includes Site B. Further downstream, I'm sure it comes back up again, where it gets narrower as well.
Thank you. That's helpful. And I think this follows along, and just to confirm, based on that description, it may be the case that by moving Solvang's wells from a location at or upstream of the Alisal Bridge location to well site B may result in increased flows at Alisal Bridge. Does that follow?
It won't adversely affect flows directly, right? Because it won't deplete flows from the bridge, but that was addressed by Stetson in their Tech Memo 6. And they looked at adjustments to stream flows, and the stream flow changes there would be based on additional releases, right? And the confusing calculation of of dewatered storage that's used for the USBR wells, right? And all of that is relatively complicated, but quantified quite well. There won't, the city's project would have much less effect in a whole bunch of ways than if it were, than it would if it were located in closer to that stream flow gauge and that area of the river.
Let me see if I
Does
can
that answer it? Maybe that
unpack
doesn't.
that and I understand. So one, and I can go back and look too at Stetson, but as I recall, under Stetson number 6 in that memorandum, one of the conclusions there was that the change in the location of the city's wells would result in, I think it was 52 acre-feet per year additional flows at Ollisall Bridge. Is that because of additional releases from Kachuma Reservoir? Is that what you're testifying to here?
That's the only, yes, that's correct. That's the only mechanism by which that additional flow can be made, because it wouldn't be a direct connection of the pumping here changing flows at the bridge.
But I thought, so my understanding, and that's my understanding, is that the increase at the Ollisall Bridge was because the wells would no longer pump above the bridge. They would now pump at well site B, which means that those wells would not be taking water above Ollisall Bridge. It would be taking the water below, not necessarily because of increased releases from Kachuma.
You're right. It's both of those, but it's both of those. Thank you. It's the shift, the removal of flow. I was thinking of it in a vacuum. The removal of flow from upstream and the shifting of that to a downstream position where it wouldn't have effect on that stream flow gauge.
And that portion of the change would only occur if there is connection between the underflow that is the source of Solvang's wells upstream of Ollisall Bridge and the surface flows. There has to be connection between the two.
There is connection in that area.
Okay.
Yeah. Sorry.
Thank you. That's helpful. I probably will have more questions, but I think I'll turn to I'll turn to the room for cross-examination. I think I'm going in my usual order by looking first. Well, let's do this. If I see Mr. Puccini here, Mr. Puccini, are you prepared to ask any questions you may have for Mr. Nicely?
Yes, thank you.
Please go ahead.
Good morning, Mr. Nicely. Nice to see you again.
Puccini. Hello.
So I wanted to start just focusing on sort of the thrust of your rebuttal testimony, which is that according to your testimony, the reach that you described in well site B is predominantly disconnected. Ms. Mullen, can we pull up CDFW 87, please? So that is, again, your testimony that reach is predominantly disconnected?
It is, and it's also
Okay.
that of Mr. Custis.
And another way to state that is that is a losing reach.
Yeah, always losing, to use Mr. Custis's phrase.
Okay. And then at CDFW 87, if you can go to PDF 92, please. And one of the ways you have made that determination that it's a losing reach is by comparing the water levels at the SY 1111 and SY 1113, correct?
That's right.
That's the discussion in your testimony, your second survey rebuttal, starting at page 9, paragraphs 19 to roughly paragraph 22. Is that correct?
I'm sorry, are we talking about Solvang 190?
Yes, the second survey rebuttal. Thank you.
I start talking about that on paragraph 8.
Okay.
But then predominantly in paragraphs 20 onward, yeah.
Okay, thank you. So you see the map in front of you. Do you see where it says USBR node 17 and it has the state well ID number 6N, etc.?
I do.
Is that SY 1111?
This is zone 17, node 17 Is,
Yes.
I need to look at my, need to be real. Give me a second if you would. I'm looking at my presentation slides.
Take your
It
time,
has
no
the numbers
problem.
on the top. So my first was node 17, which is the well shown there on the right,
Okay.
17R01. And my
And is that
second is node 16, which is not that well at node 15, but is the black well that's between the two, the black
right?
dot between the two.
And node 16, as you just pointed out, is not indicated on this map, but it is downstream of node 17, in between 15 and 17, basically.
Correct. That's about a mile according to this map too. So,
And again, just for tracking purposes, node 17 is SY 1111, correct?
yes, that's right.
And node 16 would be SY 1113, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Ms. Muller, if you can move down to the next page, 93. Now, let's see. I'll represent to you that this hydrograph is taken from node 15 based on the state well ID number. And I know that you haven't covered that, but you see here that based on this graph that the underflow elevation is well above the channel thalway, correct?
Mr. Kestis, there's two hydrographs on my screen. Are we talking about the one on the right? Figure
Oh, I'm sorry. I was looking at
B-02?
my, actually, yes, the one on the right.
Right, right.
Okay.
Can we just clarify, we're talking about what's labeled as page 94?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, and then moving down to page 95, I'll represent to you again based on the state well ID number that this is node 17, otherwise known as SY 1111.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, thank you. And do you see the blue line shows that in some cases the underflow elevation is at or above the channel thalweg?
That way, yes, I do see that. I would question the choice of that thalweg elevation, because that is not what's been used by CDFW. The line was drawn slightly higher, and I understand that that is important, but
Okay.
I want to point that out.
The reason I'm bringing these up is just because it creates some confusion for me that essentially we seem to be getting different results based on the hydrographs that, well, based on what you looked at in terms of the comparison between SY 1111 and 1113 compared to what we're seeing here. What we're seeing here shows that if we were to rely on these data, and tell me if you agree with this, is that this section is not necessarily a predominant losing reach, as your testimony indicates. Is there, so I'm kind of looking for an explanation or clarification as to why we have what appear to be two different results as to your conclusions about disconnection in the affected reach.
I'd be glad to talk about that. Can you help me a little bit by telling me which the other result is that's different, as you said?
Right. And let's just focus on this page 95 because it's just SY 1111.
I see.
What I'm seeing from this graph is that the underflow elevation appears to, at times at least, and in many instances, be very close or in some cases above the channel thalweg. And that seems to be different than the conclusion you reached that the losing reach is predominantly disconnected. And so I'm just kind of asking for some clarification as to why you think there might be a difference in the results.
Yeah, okay, I got it. We're not talking about the other pages. We're talking about this page 95, right?
Right, and I'm focused on 95 because this is the only one that deals with SY 1111. The previous one was just for illustration. I recognize that's node 15, which is below 1113 and not within, as you described it, the affected reach. So this is just so I don't know what 1113 would read based on this report because it's not included.
That's right. But the next one downstream is, which is something that I also reviewed but didn't present. Yeah, so this shows what I consider and I described as being principally disconnected seasonally. So the water levels decline, and they decline seasonally, meaning, well, annually. And as I said, they are maintained at a high subsurface water elevation so that you can see them all at a relatively steady range that varies by 5 or 10 feet. And then I describe this as being recharged by annual releases. And you can see how it returns to a higher level for a short while and then continues to decline. And that happens annually. So that is what I described as the ephemeral dynamic nature of the stream, and that it comes up and down, touches the top for a while, and then falls back down.
So this is why you said in your testimony that it's not, the affected reach is not always disconnected, but quote unquote predominantly disconnected.
My phrase in paragraph 22, which was a restatement of my earlier testimony, is that the dynamic river system has been principally disconnected seasonally, which is emphasized here.
Okay. And so does that mean too that when we have those late fall winter releases from Kachuma, which you claim would refill the amount of water that Solvang would take from well site B, that might be an instance where you actually have connection between underflow and the bottom of the subsurface channel?
I'm sorry.
In other words, that there could be connection at that point in time.
There absolutely could be connection. I'm not saying at all that it would never be connected. It is connected when whatever the proper thalweg elevation is, whatever the appropriate accurate thalweg elevation is, when the water level rises and interacts with that surface, it absolutely is connected. It is just if we were to count the number of times when that came into contact with what's shown here, the pink line, or maybe reasonably a slightly higher line, then that would be a small proportion of the time. So yeah, it is connected from time to time.
So just to follow up on that, we talk about the unsaturated and saturated zone. If you have a situation, say, and just hypothetically in late fall, early winter, where you have that connection and you have a saturated zone, because of that, your seepage rate will not be constant, correct? You only have a constant seepage rate when you have disconnect based on your testimony, correct?
That's right. The seepage rate would be much lower or even reversed for a short while when they're connected.
Switching, kind of staying on the same topic, but slightly different. I noticed in your direct testimony, Solvang 5, in a couple of places, and one is on page 14, lines 13 through 15, and one is on page 21, lines 20 through 22. I don't know if you have that in front of you, but if you'd like to refresh your memory. Okay. So I'm just going to read to you those two sections. They're pretty brief. Page 14, lines 13 through 15 from Solvang 5 reads, lowering the subsurface water level would result in increasing the gradient and rate of seepage through the riverbed toward the water table where this drawdown occurs below the active river channel. And then on page 21 at lines 20 through 22, you state rather the drawdown caused by subsurface water pumping may increase the rate of natural downward seepage from surface water to subsurface water. And the reason I'm reading those excerpts is because it strikes me that those statements, well, that you made those statements in the context of some assumption or presumption that the affected reach is connected. In other words, what would be the purpose of these statements if you weren't addressing that particular conclusion?
Right. That's great. Can we take those one by one? or
Please.
together?
Yeah,
Either way.
whatever works for you.
Okay, sure. So if we could look at your first statement, page 14, that's paragraph 37, about the lowering of subsurface levels, water
Correct.
level that would result in increasing the gradient rate of seepage.
Right.
So that paragraph, to be clear, is in a review of Stetson's technical memorandum number 6. So it's summarizing what's been known before. In that context, which predated the discussion about connection and disconnection and the hearing issue that became, well, what is disconnection, that came later. That's one thing. Arguably, that sentence could have been written a little more carefully so that it stood alone. But the overall context of that statement, that lowering of surface water would result in increasing a gradient rate of seepage, was provided in the context of the Tech Memo 6. So that was talking about a state of connection, and during that condition, that state of connection, because indeed, if you do move from connection to disconnection, and you lower the subsurface water levels to instill that disconnection, the rate of seepage does indeed increase. So yeah, in hindsight, that sentence on page 14 could have been written a little more carefully to stand alone, but it did not. Now, the paragraph 53 on page 21 of my testimony, that's lines 20 to 22, I guess, right?
Correct.
That analysis was in a different context as well. The analysis was about a conservative assumption of cities pumping that would remove surface flow. The first line of that paragraph, I don't know if we want to show it here, but do we? I don't think, do we?
I can read it. It says the analysis also conservatively assumes cities pumping would remove surface flow from the river at a 1-to-1 ratio.
Right. So this was in the context of that 1-to-1 relationship of the river well pumping and depletion of surface flows not being realistic. And it was, and then it provided the counterpoint of lines 20 to 22. Rather, the drawdown caused by subsurface well pumping may increase the rate of pumping downward seepage. So that's silent on the issue of connection and disconnection, and assumed the transition from connection to disconnection, which would indeed increase the rate of seepage.
So at the time you provided this testimony, were you of the opinion that you have now, which is that the stretch, the affected reach, is predominantly disconnected?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Ms. Mullen, you can take down the exhibit. Thank you. Going back to the first excerpt on page 14, did Stetson, and I just don't remember, did Stetson in memo number 6 or any of his other technical memorandums, and even and also as to page 21, the CEQA document, the EIR, have a conclusion about connection or disconnection of that affected reach? And the reason I ask that is because it sounds like the reason you were providing this testimony, at least as to page 21, was in response to the CEQA analysis. And I'm left thinking to myself, reading this, that perhaps the EIR had, as a working assumption, that affected reach would have connectivity, and then drew a conclusion that it would be less than significant and so on and so forth. So I'm just kind of looking for clarification on that.
Right. The phrase disconnection appears nowhere in Tech Memo 6.
Okay.
The only use of the word connection is about pipelines being attached to well site B. And however, the dynamic nature of the river is included in their modeling. That's part of all of these analysis. That includes this complicated numerical model that they used and the overall Sentinez River hydrologic model. So it was an underlying assumption that wasn't stated directly in Tech Memo 6.
Help me understand that, and maybe I was just missing a part. Can you clarify what the underlying assumption was as to that affected reach, specifically whether the underlying assumption was that it was predominantly disconnected or not?
Well, I didn't write it, and it was silent on the issue, so it's hard to know. But I do know from working with the author that we share a common understanding of the nature of the river, specifically in this reach. I don't want to put words in his mouth, but we know that the river is gaining in places and losing in places. And that was clear throughout this. And they provided hydrographs of wells in there, and they had modeled results of what stream flow would be at different places along the river, all of which were part of it. It just didn't directly address the words connection and disconnection because it was, well, it was assumed in all of the working models using all the water level data from the river.
And I also noticed in your direct testimony that the word disconnect really only comes up in the context of discussion about the pools and the effect of the receding of the river and so forth. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's become more important since I wrote that in September. It's come to the fore to address that directly. And when I wrote that September 8th, it was not at the forefront of what we were discussing.
Okay, thank you.
Directly.
Okay. Yeah. Just going back to the comparison between SY 1111 and SY 1113, and then what we were talking about in terms of the CMA report and what they show in their hydrograph. It strikes me that the easiest way to determine what the water levels actually are at any given time, and what's missing is a direct measurement in the river itself. The wells SY 1111, as I understand it, is 1,000 feet from the river. So wouldn't it be more definitive, I guess, to determine what those water levels are, this whole issue of disconnect, predominant or otherwise, by doing that kind of direct measurement? Would that actually be more reliable, I suppose, in terms of determining this particular issue?
Can't speak to reliability, but I can speak to the management of the river, Mr. Puccini, that the USBR has been using these wells to determine the dewatered storage and the needs for releases in coordination with CDFW's measuring, I believe, in the annual COMB reports and all the others that are frankly outside of my area of expertise. So maybe I shouldn't even bring them up. But there have been no discussions about installing monitoring wells in the river to determine pumpage from the river wells. And there's been pumping in this river for a long, long time.
Okay. And you may not know the answer. I certainly don't, as I ask this, but is the purpose of that nodal network, is it to measure groundwater or is it to measure underflow? I guess is my question. Like,
right. Well, all of the water in the subsurface in the San Diego River is managed as surface water and is underflow. There's some discussions going on about what that water should be called between the State Board and the Department of Water Resources and the Groundwater Sustainability agencies. But whatever the water is called, if you want to call it underflow or subsurface water, those USBR wells measure that. They measure the subsurface water, the underflow of the river.
Okay. So we talked about the possibility, as Mr. Custis said, that the river downstream from the well site B could be a gaining reach. So I'm trying to conceptualize, like, what does it look like under the ground when you have a losing reach in the stretch that we're talking about, the affected reach, and then it transitions to a gaining reach? What happens in that transition? So the losing to gaining transition, does it move downstream?
Does what move downstream?
Well, does a losing gaining transition move downstream when the underflow level declines with pumping? In other words, I'm trying to get an understanding of like what effect, if any, pumping from a losing reach, a disconnected reach, right, has on, say, a gaining reach somewhere downstream from there. There's got to be some transition. I'm just kind of curious, like what goes on there from a hydrogeologic perspective.
Right. Well, as a geologist and a hydrogeologist, I maintain that it's the geology that controls that. Obviously, pumping affects the water levels in that material, but the gaining and losing reaches are controlled largely by the boundaries of this material. The bedrock on the bottom becomes shallower. The width of the channel becomes narrower. Both of those have the effect of creating a place where the water is rising and the pools start to form and the river flows. The subsurface water flows into the river and recharges the river.
So you don't see, if it's, let's just say that the affected reach is completely disconnected all the time, let's say, and below there at some distance, there's a gaining reach. You don't see any effect whatsoever on that gaining reach. In other words, stream capture and so forth from, say, the city's pumping in well site B, correct?
I'm going to object to incomplete hypothetical. I think it's a little unclear. There's just a lot of assumptions with that question and which reach, how far downstream we're actually talking. If Mr. Puccini could clarify, I think it would help Mr. Nicely actually answer his question and avoid potentially inaccurate testimony based on a misunderstanding of the question.
Thank you. I'll try, and if I fail, I'll move on. But what I'm trying to understand is, first presumption is that the affected reach, as Mr. Nicely described it, is completely disconnected from the channel. And say a mile downstream, you have a change and it's moving to a gaining reach now. What's going on if that's a situation where you've got one section that's losing and one section that's gaining? What effect, if any, will pumping in the losing reach have on the gaining reach?
Well, it won't change the nature of the reaches, to be clear. The gaining reach will continue to be a gaining reach. I think you're wondering what happens to that because the city's pumping. And we analyze the distance downstream that the city's project would have, which was 0.7 miles from my earlier Solvang 5, right? This well was beyond that distance, so I considered what the hearing officer called the relevant reaches of the river. And the relevant reaches from the city's point of view are those that are potentially affected by the city's project, which only extend 0.7 miles downstream. 1 mile downstream is beyond that distance. And further, when it transitions to a gaining reach, is well beyond the city's radius of influence.
Okay, thank you. I can move on from that. Appreciate the clarification. Just want to address something kind of really quickly. You seem to emphasize in your survey rebuttal indirect testimony that the climate in the San Ynez River watershed is arid or semi-arid. Do you recall that testimony?
It is, yeah, I do.
And I think you also state that in your direct testimony on page 14, lines 15 through 16, you say that the San Ynez River receives a significantly less rainfall of between 16 and 28 inches with reference to exhibit Solvang 175. Do you recall that?
This is Solvang 5 by direct testimony, page 14?
Yes, Solvang 5 there.
Sorry, where is that?
Lines 15 and 16.
Sorry, I'm not seeing anything about inches on that part of my direct testimony on page 14.
Okay, I'm on page 14, line 15, 16. It reads, in contrast, the San Ynez River is an ephemeral stream that receives significantly less rainfall of between 16 and 28 inches.
I'm sorry, Mr. Bivens, I'm looking at Solvang 5, my
Yes.
original direct testimony.
Oh, I'm sorry. I apologize. The reason I was off is because the footer is describing the document incorrectly. This is Solvang 171. This is your rebuttal expert testimony, excuse me.
Thank you.
And so again, at lines 15 through 16 on page 14.
Give me a second, that'd be great. Since we're not showing it on screen, I need to pull it up in front of me. So
Thank you for doing that. And then Ms. Mullen, in the meantime, can you pull up Solvang 175?
second, please.
Mr. Nicely, let me know when you're ready with 171. Thank you.
Now we're on page 14.
Yes, thank you. Lines 15 through 16.
We're now on the same page. Yeah, I have it in front of me.
Okay, and you see the reference to 16 and 28 inches.
I do.
Okay, and then you reference exhibit 175. So we have 175 on the screen. Ms. Mullen, can you go to PDF 7 in that document? This is not matching up. Hold on for a second. Oh, it's yeah, if you could just go down the screen a little bit under watershed overview. So you see under the paragraph with the header climate, there's reference to 16.20 inches and 28.11 inches. Mr. Nicely?
I do.
Is that where you are those the numbers you relied on to say that there's less rainfall of 16 and 28 inches?
I'm gonna object. I'm just not as to, I guess, the scope. I mean, this is we're on Mr. Nicely's rebuttal testimony, and this is going into great detail on his rebuttal testimony, and I'm not sure the purpose.
Well, he says in both his rebuttal and rebuttal that the San Ynez River watershed is arid and semi-arid, and he's referencing 175 as to the annual rainfall of 16 and 28 inches. And I want to ask him where he is concluding, or what the basis of his conclusion is, that the climate is arid and semi-arid when you have 175, which describes it as a Mediterranean climate, using the same rainfall count.
I think I'm going to allow this to go forward on a limited basis, in part also because Mr. Nicely testified as to the differences between the San Ynez as an ephemeral stream and a perennial stream, and I think the climate here is related. But I understand where you're coming from, Ms. O'Sullivan. I had actually the same thought, but I would like to see where this goes. We just won't spend too much time. So please go ahead, Mr. I'm not sure where we are actually, Mr. Pacini. You may have to ask the question again.
My question is, what is the basis for Mr. Nicely's conclusion that the climate in the San Ynez River watershed is arid and semi-arid when 175, which he references, describes as a Mediterranean climate based on the rainfall listed
Yeah,
here?
I hear two questions. First of all, yes, 16 to 28 inches in my rebuttal testimony, it did indeed reference right after that Solvang 175, and the numbers 16 and 28 inches come directly out of that bottom paragraph there. It's the first answer to the first question. Now, as to the second question about Mediterranean climate, a Mediterranean climate is a xeric climate, which is semi-arid climate. They're the same. There are different phrases. There's several different ways to describe the same period. And that the rest of that paragraph, so that 16 to 28 inches was compared to the 75 inches per year that is received in the South Fork Eel River tributary.
Okay.
And the stream flow was also compared to that paragraph, which showed that the next exhibit, Solvang 175, 176, 6 that showed that the stream flow was only 6% of the average annual stream flow here, as in the South Fork of the Eel River.
Okay, thank you. And then Ms. Kenzie, the reason I went into this is for the reasons I stated. He's using semi-arid and arid compared to Mediterranean. So I was just trying to make the record clear, but I think there's also some connection, which I'm not going to go into, about how that characterization plays into this notion of what the clogging layer is.
Objection, Mr. Pacini is not testifying. I don't think it's appropriate for him to be providing the hearing officer argument for the context of his questions.
And I think it sounds like you're through, Mr. Pacini.
I am.
Fine,
Yes,
so
thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. So Mr. Nicely, focusing again on your statement that there's a condition of predominant disconnection in the affected reach. You've stated in your different testimony that the amount of water that Solvang is going to remove on an annual basis in the Wellside B area will be refilled basically from releases from Kachuma. Is that accurate?
That's the understanding, yeah.
Okay. And I think in your testimony previously, you said that you identified a loss rate of 0.6 CFS per mile. Is that correct?
That's correct. That was not my number. That was from the source I referenced, which I don't have in front of me.
Have you made any determination, because I haven't seen it in your testimony, as to strike that? When you say that the amount of water will be, made up through releases from Kachuma, the refill, when you say refill, do you mean total refill, or it'll refill at some level?
So the USBR makes their releases from Kachuma Dam to refill the aquifer by the way the river is managed, right? That's the purpose of those USBR wells, and they will be, my understanding from the water rights order is that they will be refilled. I was silent on whether they'd be entirely refilled, or what was the other phrase you used?
Partially refilled.
Partially refilled. I understand they have to be refilled for the downstream water users.
So your statement about refill is more of a general understanding that the releases will make up for the water that are removed as from well site B, correct?
I don't know whether it's general or specific, but.
Well, let me get into that. We know that the loss rate, well, let's assume that the loss rate is 0.6 CFS per mile. That's a vertical measurement, or a linear measurement, I should say. I guess what I want to ask is, have you actually done any calculations to determine, based on the releases from Kachuma, looking at that water right order or other relevant orders, how long will actually take for the void that's created from the pumping to refill?
The answer to that question is outside of the questions we've been asked so far, Mr. Pacini, and has to do with the management of the river, which is outside of my expertise.
Is it possible to do that calculation though? I mean, it's just a mathematical
Objection calls for speculation and is well outside the scope of any of Mr. Nicely's testimonies. I mean, as Mr. Nicely already answered, that's down to the management of the river, which is not, what the city's project is about.
So, Mr. Nicely, it's your testimony that Solvang has not determined how long it will take for the water that's removed from the well site B pumping to be entirely replaced.
That's outside of the questions I've been asked to answer. The timing of recharge is already being managed by others, by the operators of the river, not a single water user in the city of Solvang. And no, it is not something I've calculated.
And that strikes me as a little bit odd, because if you don't know how long it's going to take
Objection. Again, Mr. Puccini is editorializing. If I could request that the hearing officer just direct Mr. Puccini to ask the questions of Mr. Nicely.
That's fine. You can go ahead with your, we didn't actually get to the question. Go ahead with your question, Mr. Puccini.
I'll just try to restate it, an earlier question somewhat differently. The bottom line is that at this time, Mr. Nicely, you don't know how long it will take based on the Kachuma releases for that underflow to be refilled so that you do not have a deficit going forward.
While I don't know how long it takes, I do know that the releases are made in a timely fashion to recharge them quickly. And in the past have done so.
Okay.
Perhaps they've over-released in the past year, but that's just based on the management of the river, my understanding of the management of the river, but is not a scientific analysis and is because it was already being managed by others. I can't figure out everything about this complicated river.
So if that's true and it's left to others to determine what releases are needed for refill, would it be your understanding that that management team would have to track Solvang's withdrawals?
No. They would measure what's important, which is the water levels in their wells, the USBR nodal network that is used for that purpose.
I see. When I understand I think the concept when you have a disconnected stream, the rate of seepage, the maximum, it is a constant rate. Is that correct?
When the river is disconnected, the rate is constant, correct?
And in that situation, is it true that the only way to increase seepage in this instance would be either to release water when the river is dry or increase releases in the fall winter to increase the overall area for infiltration? In other words,
Objection.
physical parameters needed to increase the rate of infiltration.
Again, I'm going to object that that's an incomplete hypothetical that, I mean, personally, I'm not following Mr. Puccini on the parameters of that, and I think it will invite confusing testimony based on a potential misunderstanding of the question.
Well, let me try the question if the way I understood it, and then we'll go from there. And I'm interested now. I'm curious. What are the factors, Mr. Nicely, that might affect the rate at which surface water infiltrates into the subsurface when there is a disconnected state between the surface flow and the subsurface flow?
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm remiss to say that it can't really be adjusted. That's up to the nature of the geologic materials, and those don't change, right? The water's released, and if it's disconnected, the water will infiltrate at a set rate. I don't see how that could be adjusted upwards or downwards.
Does that so it wouldn't, if for example the rate of flow increased such that a larger surface area of the riverbed had surface flow on it, would that be expected to change the infiltration rate?
Well, yes, that does happen, but my understanding is that even that, as the water jumps out of the channel onto the riverbanks, right, and increases the area, that would increase the flow. I mean, increase the infiltration, but that's relatively ephemeral, and I don't think is a large contributor to recharge. Sure, it would, but that's not made. They can't be maintained for long times, and it happens during extreme large releases or stream flow from other areas that aren't related to Kachuma Dam, from the Santinas uplands or the rivers from the south that also recharge the river. They happen. The rate increases, and then it decreases down to a baseline.
So would it be fair to say when that you would expect when Kachuma is releasing in the generally in the, as I understand, in the late summer fall, these flows to make whole, so to speak, the downstream water right holders, that the rate of seepage in the area of well site B you would expect to be fairly constant during that time.
That's right. I've seen other old documents that show the rate at which that water releases, propagates downstream when it's dry, and how many days it takes. Old-timey documents that weren't really part of this discussion for this hearing, but it's well understood by the folks who manage the releases on how long it takes the water in the surface to get there. And
I would like to object on hearsay grounds of his testifying as to the efforts of other managers of the river. That doesn't seem to be based on personal knowledge or necessarily, I don't believe he said he was an expert in those matters.
I think, and noted, thank you, Ms. Beal. I note the hearsay objection. We can allow hearsay in administrative proceedings, so I'll allow it, but I was asking just to clarify for the record, I was asking the question to the extent, within Mr. Nicely's expertise, which as he has stated, does not include here management of the river, and I understand that. Mr. Nicely, I think you'd finish, but I don't know if you were interrupted there.
I was just emphasizing that there are documents that I am not experts that I'm not experts of that describe the rate at which water during releases goes downstream and how quickly that happens and to what degree that happens and how quickly the wells recharge. I think that's relatively well understood.
Thank you. And I think with that, I'll give the things back to Mr. Pacini.
Yeah, just two last questions. So just following up with that last series of questions, would it be accurate then that any amount of pumping from underflow and well site B, whether it's from Solvang or others, the expectation is that will always be made up from Kachuma releases?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Stop there. And then a long time ago when we spoke, we talked about not just the rate of refill that we just went over, but also what I described as the time lag. So my understanding from your testimony is that the refill is going to occur in the late fall, winter when you have Kachuma releases and maybe some precip and so forth. In the meantime, and tell me if this is correct, the underflow is going to, that level is going to drop as Solvang continues to pump. But that is not going to be addressed in real time because, again, the refill is going to happen later in time. So there will be a lag. Is that correct?
I think the timing will not change, Mr. Pacini. I think that what has been shown on the central management areas hydrographs that you've shown is the same general pattern which will occur before and after the city's project.
Okay.
The timing won't change. The city's project will, Insight B will, if it were to happen, to proceed, would have that same general pattern as far as timing of the river. It would continue to be refilled.
Okay. That's all I have for questions from Mr. Nicely, Ms. Kinsey. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Nicely.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Pacini, and thank you, Mr. Nicely. I would like to go ahead and take a 10-minute break before we return and continue with cross-examination of Mr. Nicely. So it's 10:30. Let's go ahead and return at 10:40, and we will pick up there. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, it's 10:40. So once I see everyone back online, we will go ahead and get started. All right, I'll go ahead and get started. I believe where we left off, we had Mr. Pacini had completed his cross-examination. So with that, I will turn to one of the other fisheries entities, maybe first Ms. Beal. Do you have questions for Mr. Nicely?
Yeah, I do. Thank you.
Please go ahead.
And Mr. Nicely, I just had a couple follow-ups on your testimony about where the Santa Ynez is or is not connected to the subsurface flow. Please correct me, but I thought I heard you say that it was, to your knowledge, connected in some places and disconnected in other places. If you'd like to comment.
Hello, Ms. Beal. Yeah, that is my understanding, that it is connected in places and disconnected in other places.
What is that understanding based on?
Yeah, it's based on our work for the groundwater sustainability plan that we've been working on that was just approved, and understanding of the river, but specifically it was based on our review of the water level data and discussions with others working in the river in this area, and the way that the flow in the gauges operates, review of Stetson's tech memos, the Santina River hydrologic model documentation, and specifically the hydrographs that I've showed, specifically to show the disconnection in this area. Is there more? I'm sorry, what? I don't know how broad I should go on that, or how.
I couldn't hear the last thing you said, something about disconnected in some area.
Oh yeah, my understanding is that it's connected in some areas, specifically quite a ways upstream, and could be connected downstream of this area, where the river narrows. So it's based on review of hydrographs and the nature of the river.
When you say nature of the river, what do you mean exactly is the nature of the river?
Yeah, great question. Specifically, the width and depth of the alluvium related to flow, and the places where, so specifically where the river alluvium becomes narrow, as I mentioned, downstream of the Buellton subarea, downstream of the city of Buellton.
What's that?
Furthermore, like down at the Lompoc Narrows is another place where the river becomes tight and narrow, and the river flows more readily than those sections than it does here, where it's broad and deep.
Okay, and just going back, you said our work for the groundwork sustainability plan. Who are you referring to when you say our work?
So I was one of the two primary authors for the Santa Ynez Eastern Santa Ynez River Eastern Management Area Groundwater Sustainability Plan, which was just approved by the DWR yesterday. That was several years of work that went into that, and it involved quite a bit of analysis of the whole area.
So I'm sorry. So who is our? Who are the?
Our is my firm, GSI Water Solutions, and my colleagues, along with the groundwater sustainability agencies, which includes a lot of these same agencies who are working in the river.
Okay, thank you. And then could you talked about the flow and gauges, that data that's in your testimony. Is that summarized? Where would I find that information?
The flow analysis?
Just going back to my question, I believe you stated that our work, referring to you and your colleagues on the groundwork sustainability plan, and then you reference flow and gauges. I assume you're talking about data points that you analyzed?
The two stream flow gauges, Ms. Beal, are the Santinez River flow gauge, and then the next one is the Lompoc Narrows gauge over 20 miles downstream.
Mhm.
Those are discussed in my Solvang 5. I'd have to figure out where that is. I'd be glad to, if you'd like.
That's okay. And then just to verify, when you talked about the hydrograph you were showing at well site B, are you assuming a particular location for wells pumping in well site B?
No. The locations were included in our modeling. It was summarized in my original direct testimony, Solvang 5. But they were not, that wasn't relevant to the current discussion. We were comparing the Site B as a whole.
Site B as a whole. Okay.
And
Thank
that
you.
specific monitoring well that is near there, the USBR nodal well.
I have no further questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Beal. Thank you, Mr. Nicely. I will turn now to Ms. Crope. Do you have questions for Mr. Nicely?
No, Your Honor.
Great, thank you. And then I will continue on down the list. Mr. Bivens, do you have questions on behalf of CCRB for Mr. Nicely?
I do not. Thank you, Ms. Kinsey.
Thank you. And the parent district, do you have any questions?
No, we do not. Thank you.
Thank you. And ID number 1?
No questions, Your Honor.
Thank you. And Alisal Guest Ranch?
No questions from Alisal Guest Ranch.
Great. I think at this point I will turn to my team, and I didn't warn them in advance, but Mr. Anderson or Mr. Woldridge, do you have any follow-up questions for Mr. Nicely?
I don't.
Alrighty. Then I will turn to you, Ms. O'Sullivan. Do you, based on the questions I had and cross-examination, do you have a redirect for Mr. Nicely?
Yes, just very briefly. Just give me one moment here. Okay. So, Mr. Nicely, if you recall, there were some questions, I believe, from Mr. Pacini regarding the central management area hydrographs showing that, you know, seasonally the line kind of blips up to be very close to under the Thalweg of the river and potentially right at it. Could you explain when that upward oscillation happens seasonally?
You bet. That upward oscillation or potential time for interconnection happens when water is flowing down the river. That can be from stream releases from Bradbury Dam or stream flow from San Ynez upland tributaries above this area, or from the south, from the San Ynez, from the south of the river. But it happens when the water is really flowing down the river. There's a lot of water when that happens.
So that would be like in the winter flow period.
Correct. Yeah, that's generally when we in our Mediterranean xeric semi-arid climate get all of our rain in the wintertime. Correct.
Okay, and so these periods where potential connection is more likely in the winter, as you said, that's a time of higher flow, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And
right.
Could you just kind of explain how the level of pumping that Solvang is proposing in its project compares to that overall flow, and what your opinion is on Solvang's proposed pumping and its effect on surface flow under those higher flow conditions when there might be a higher potential for connection?
Yeah, that makes sense. During those winter times, demand is lowest and the city will be pumping the least, but during those brief times when the water is highest and there's a potential for connection, coincides with the lowest demand and the least pumping. With that, those are the specific times when the city's pumping would have the least effect, because there's lots of stream flow going down the river, and that it would be unnoticeable. The city's pumping would not be noticed because there would be so much water flowing down the stream. The percentage of the stream flow that could potentially be taken by the city goes down and down and down as the stream flow rises and the potential for connection increases. So when the water in the subsurface is potentially higher, and when the stream is really flowing, the city's effects would be the least. Any pumping that they do, it would be least for those two reasons. First of all, because of the small percentage of the flow that the city's extractions or diversions would entail, and secondly, because the city's demands during those wet times are low, right? There's not a lot of irrigating going on. Everybody's home. It's raining. The demand is quite low in the city system.
Great. All right. Thank you. That's all my questions.
Thank you, Ms. O'Sullivan, and thank you, Mr. Nicely. I will then turn back to Mr. Puccini. Do you have any follow-up questions based on that redirect?
I do not, thank you.
Thank you. And I'll just look to the room. Does anyone else have any follow-up questions based on that redirect?
I have a quick follow-up, Mr. Nicely.
Go ahead.
You just, I believe, said the city's pumping wouldn't be noticeable during the wet season because you referred to a fraction of the subsurface water. Is that what you're saying, that there's that you've calculated a percentage of the total available water that the city would be removing?
Well, we're referring to not as a number of a percentage, but as a general concept, Ms. Beal, that the proportion would be much, much less because of the much higher amount of flow that is flowing down the river relative to the city's potential diversion.
The proportion would be less than what?
Okay, so the comparison of the city's diversion rate to the total stream flow would be much lower during the times when there's a lot of stream flow in the river and the potential for connection exists.
And then you're saying that that fraction will be higher when there's less stream flow in the river.
Yeah.
You used the word fraction, and I was trying to make sure I understood because I didn't recall seeing that expressed as a percentage. So I'm trying to understand what you meant when you said fraction.
Well, I think it was as a percentage in my original testimony, but nonetheless, and I'll see if I can find it while I'm speaking. But nonetheless, during the other times when, if we recall that hydrograph from the central management areas report that shows the water going up and down in those wells, the time when the water level is highest, the city's pumping would have the least effect. And when the water level starts to decline, they would presumably become disconnected and the city's pumping would not have an effect at all. So it's...
Okay. So presuming that your testimony based on disconnection, there would be no effect.
Based on disconnection, based on the data from the USBR's monitoring network, yeah.
And then just to clarify, when you talked about whether the river is connected or disconnected, you were looking at 2 points. Was that the Santa Ynez River gauge and Lompoc? Is that correct?
I'm going to object that that's getting outside the scope of my very limited redirect. And I think we've already covered what nodes Mr. Nicely analyzed in his surrebuttal testimony.
Mr. Nicely, when just to close this one, you talked about the fraction. When you're talking about the fraction being smaller when there's more flow and being lower when there's, or being higher when there's less flow, are you talking about exactly at well site B in particular? What part of the river are you referring to?
I can only refer to the places where the flow is measured. And that is at the upstream and downstream gauges at Alisal Bridge upstream and the Lompoc Narrows downstream.
Thank you. No more questions.
Thank you, Ms. Beal. I will once again turn to the room to see if there are any additional follow-up questions. All right. I think with that, we have completed this. Mr. Nicely, I just wanted to thank you for joining us once again and being here. And thank you for addressing the topics that I identified. I really appreciate that. And I appreciate you answering my questions today and being with us. So thank you.
As do I. Thank you very much.
I think at this point we can pivot to consideration of the admission of exhibits, which is the next on my to-do list. I would like to, I think what I indicated, I thought it made the most sense to just step through one by one, starting with the city of Solvang. I know we previously admitted exhibits for the city of Solvang, but there are some, I think, that have, there are some additional. One issue is there are, I think, 3 exhibits subject to a pending request for official notice. There are some, I think, cross-examination exhibits, and then these surrebuttal related exhibits. Does that fit with your understanding, Ms. O'Sullivan? Am I on the right track?
Yes. And just to make sure that nothing is missed, my suggestion would just be that I say it all over again and add the new exhibits, which are, which my understanding is the things that we have not yet offered are Mr. Nicely's first rebuttal, which is 187, and then the other exhibits that we still have yet to offer would be his second rebuttal and associated attachment or exhibits, and the other judicial notice documents. So I think that's 188 through 200. So I can just restate our whole offer if that's okay, just for completeness sake.
Great, let's do that. Well,
yeah,
let's start
okay.
there, and then I will turn to the room for any objections.
Okay, great. So the city offers into evidence solving exhibits 1 through 124 inclusive, solving exhibit 125 revised, exhibit solving 126 through 165 inclusive, exhibit solving 166 revised, exhibit solving 167 through 177 inclusive, and solving 180 through 184 inclusive, solving 187 errata, and solving 188 through 200 inclusive. So there's a few cross-examination exhibits that we're not offering into evidence, but I think that's,
yes.
And then the other ones that are skipped are the ones that we've provided corrected copies of.
Understood. And then I wanted to note for the record, we previously heard, for at least those exhibits that were previously offered, we heard objections based on hearsay, and those will be submitted in writing as of next week. I think at this point, what I can do, I believe outstanding objections have been resolved with the exception of hearsay objections. But are there any additional objections, whether hearsay or otherwise, to any of the exhibits that have not previously been offered? I'll go around the room to keep this organized. But I think that's where we are in terms of what I'm looking for. So I'll turn first to you, Mr. Bivens. Does CCRB have any additional objections to the exhibits that have not previously been offered?
No additional objections. Thank you.
Thank you. I will turn to the fisheries agencies. Mr. Puccini, are there any additional objections by CDFW?
CDFW does not have any other objections. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Beal?
We object to solving number 199 and 200. Those are a request for judicial notice. It's a memorandum, and one is an email. The basis for the objection is twofold. First, they seem to be submitted, rather belatedly. They were, it seems, available at the, before the testimony was filed and that record was closed. But the other concern is that clearly there will be updates and changes in weather and precipitation, things that will happen on an ongoing basis. And it does not seem relevant to include materials intended to suggest limitations on the city's water that it will receive from the state, when that really won't be known until the end of the entire season, and there's an annual report. So the objection is both that they're out of time and that they're potentially misleading and not relevant because they're just showing one snapshot, one point in time at something that doesn't necessarily contribute to our understanding of the longer trend that's relevant here.
Thank you, Ms. Beal. I will turn to you, Ms. O'Sullivan. I also noted I was waiting to hear if there was an objection. I did note that the documents, I believe, are dated August 12th of last year of 2023. So I would be certainly, I'm interested in a response on both parts, but certainly with respect to the timeliness of Solvang 199 and 200.
Certainly. Well, if I could go in reverse order.
Great. No problem.
So as to I'm going to summarize it as relevance of the documents. The city presented testimony in its initial direct testimony as to the reliability of the state water project, including because of natural disasters like earthquakes. This particular request for official notice relates to documents showing that there was a fire at a part of the state water project that impacted deliveries to the city. And so it's it's additional evidence to explain another aspect of unreliability of the state water project that's beyond the city's control and help support our contention, which we've been making throughout the proceeding, that a diverse portfolio is important for the city so that we have the flexibility to continue to provide water to our residents, even when things like this happen, like there's a fire at a facility and it shuts down deliveries. So they are relevant, and I don't believe that they're misleading. It is a snapshot, but it shows an example of the types of unreliability that the city faces with the state water project. As far as the timing, yes, the documents were dated in August. There was some, delay with when staff received it versus when it came into the attorney's hands, but also, the hearing officer can take official notice at any time of documents. There's no requirement that those documents be provided immediately. We provided them before the final day of testimony in an interest of, trying to get it in front of everyone in a timely manner. But again, the rules of judicial and official notice allow for that to be taken at any time. And so it's not late by those rules by any means.
Thank you. Does anyone else want to comment on this issue before I'm prepared to rule on it? But does anyone else want to comment? All right. What I'm going to do here is I agree with Solvang in the sense that I think I do have the authority to take official notice in this instance. That said, I think given the balance of the situation here, which the documents, although they are somewhat relevant to the issues, or potentially relevant to the issues, I think they introduce the potential for confusion, and there's just not an opportunity at this point in the proceeding to examine more information about the circumstances involving the shutdown. And so at this point, I think the probative value is outweighed by the potential for that confusion and for needing an additional opportunity for the parties to address the subject matter in those documents. So I am going to exclude or not take official notice of Solvang 199 and 200. on that, Ms. Beal, I'll turn back to you. Do you have any additional objections to the offer made by Solvang?
No, we don't. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm looking to who I have on my screen, but I guess maybe I'll just ask the general question. Do any of the other parties have objections to the offer made by Solvang? All right, then with that, I will say the exhibits offered by Solvang in Ms. O'Sullivan's statement, with the exception of Solvang 199 and 200, and with the caveat, well, we don't have any collateral estoppel outstanding, but with the caveat of the hearsay objections that will be coming in writing, the exhibits are admitted into the evidentiary record for this proceeding. And I think with that, we have completed the record from Solvang's perspective. Is that right, Ms. O'Sullivan?
I believe so. Thank you.
Great, thank you. I'm just going down my list. I know we previously had an offer from Cal Trout, but I'm just going to go down my list in order. Otherwise, I'll get confused. Possibly, and we'll do this in the right way. So that means I'm putting you on the hot seat, Mr. Bivens. At this time, are you prepared to make an offer of exhibits on behalf of CCRB?
I am, and CCRB would move exhibits CCRB 1 through 19, 21 through 22, and CDFW 125 into evidence.
And I'm sorting myself out here, so let me take just a moment. Excuse me for a moment. I received a question about CCRB 22. So I think we're checking to make sure we have that.
That is a cross-examination exhibit.
Oh, we found it.
Ah, good.
All right, that one, 22 needs to be added to our index. I'm just noting that for everyone's information. And maybe can you just so we're all on notice here, can you describe briefly what that is, Mr. Bivens?
Exhibit CCRB 22 is decision 1486.
Okay. Great. All right, we have now moved it into the folder for everyone to see. All right, and with that, I will go around the room. Ms. O'Sullivan, do you have any objections to CCRB's offer of exhibits?
If I may, if you could come back around to me,
Sure.
I don't have objections to CCRB 1 through 18, but I need to look at 19, 21, and 22. Just those were cross, all three of those, I believe, were cross exhibits and cross-examination exhibits, and I just need to refresh if you don't mind. Apologies.
No, that's no problem. We can come back around. I will turn now to the fisheries agencies. Mr. Puccini, do you have any objections from CDFW?
No, I don't. Thank you.
Thank you. And Cal Trout, Ms. Crope?
No, Your Honor.
Thank you. And Ms. Beal on behalf of NIMS?
No objections.
Thank you. And then I will just turn generally to the water, well, I'll call you the water users. Are there any others who want to chime in with any objections to CCRB's exhibits? Which puts you back on the spot, Ms. O'Sullivan, but if you need a few minutes, I'm happy to give that to you.
If you don't mind, apologies.
If you're having trouble finding the exhibits, I can represent to you that CCRB 19 is the testimony of Ollie Sharuti of Stetson Engineers in connection with the proceedings that led to Water Right Order 2019-148. 21 is Solvang's response to CCRB's evidentiary objection, and then 22 is decision 1486 involving water right applications on the San Ynez River by ID1.
And let's go ahead. I don't mean to rush it. I want to do this carefully and make sure we get through it appropriately, since we might as well. So let's go ahead and take 5 minutes. We'll come back at 11:17 and pick up from there now that we're all kind of on notice of how quickly this may go. So I'll see you in 5 minutes.
Thank you very much for your patience.
All right, it's 11:17. I want to make sure Mr. Bivens is with, there you are. You're with us. And we have Ms. O'Sullivan. Ms. O'Sullivan, I think we're back to you. Does Solvang have any objections to CCRB's offer of its exhibits?
With respect to CCRB 1 through, make sure I got this, 1 through 18, no. And then that same, no objections to 21 or 22. And I just want to make a oral placeholder for potential hearsay objection to CCRB 19. But we have to follow up with that in writing, so.
Okay.
Yeah.
Potential hearsay to CCRB 19. And then did you have any objection to, I think we're retaining the same, which makes sense, same exhibit number to CDFW 125?
No, at this point, we've submitted Sir rebuttal testimony regarding that at this point, so I think that cat's out of the bag.
All right, with that, then with the hearsay objection, potential hearsay objection noted, I will accept into the evidentiary record the CCRB's offer of its exhibits.
Thank you.
Thank you. And with that, we can move on. I think we've done Solvang, we've done CCRB. I'd like to move to CDFW, but let me take a moment. Now that you're on notice, we're moving to CDFW. I need to pull up my own exhibit list here.
May I interrupt for a quick second while you're
Absolutely.
doing that? I'm looking at the site right now, and I might be missing it, but I'm not seeing CCRB 20, but CDFW 125 is in the CCRB folder. So maybe
Yes. CDFW 125 is in there because CCRB made the offer of CDFW 125.
Oh, I see.
Exhibit. Yeah, that's why it came there. And then CCRB 20, we just moved.
Okay.
Yes,
All right. Thank you.
exhibit. We just moved it over, so it may need to refresh.
Thank you.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. CCRB 20 was not offered.
Right.
Yes, correct.
I didn't mean to confuse things. So that's why CCRB 20 is not there. All right, so for CDFW, I did rule on several evidentiary issues and resolved those. There was one paragraph that was sustained with respect to CDFW 108, so I wanted to bring that to your attention. We also have a few objections based on collateral estoppel, which I will note was noted in the unformatted version and will be noted in the formatted version of the procedural ruling as outstanding, and those will remain. And then we also have a pending request for official notice of CDFW 124. That's outstanding as well. So with those notations, Mr. Puccini, are you prepared to make an offer of CDFW's exhibits?
I am, thank you.
Thank you. Please go ahead.
So CDFW would move to admit the following exhibits into evidence, beginning with exhibit CDFW 1 and 2. Request admission of CDFW 3, noting that it is subject to a deferred ruling on objections based on collateral estoppel. Admit exhibit CDFW 4 through CDFW 37. Admit exhibit CDFW 38, again noting that it's subject to a deferred ruling on collateral estoppel. Admit exhibit CDFW 39 through 48. CDFW 49 was excluded, so we're not seeking to admit that. Move to admit exhibits CDFW 50 and 51. Move to admit exhibit CDFW 52 errata. Move to admit exhibit CDFW 53 errata, noting that certain portions of this original testimony have been excluded per your ruling on October 27th. This was Hans Sim's case in chief testimony. Admit exhibit CDFW 54 through 66. Admit exhibit CDFW 67, which I think based on this morning's ruling, you have overruled the objections there too. It moved to admit CDFW 68 through 89. Exhibit CDFW 90 errata and CDFW 91 errata. Exhibit CDFW 92 through CDFW 99. Exhibit CDFW 100 errata. Exhibit CDFW 101 second errata. Exhibit CDFW 102. Exhibit CDFW 103, again noting that it's subject to a deferred ruling related to the collateral estoppel issue. Exhibit CDFW 104 through 106. Exhibit CDFW 107 errata. Exhibit CDFW 108, noting that some portions have been excluded per your ruling on November 30th. Exhibit CDFW 109 through 116. Exhibit CDFW 117 errata. Exhibit CDFW 121, noting that certain portions have been excluded per your November 30th ruling. Exhibit CDFW 122 and 123. Exhibit CDF 124, noting that it is there's an official request for official notice that's pending. Exhibit CDFW 126 and 127. And for exhibit CDF 128, we submitted it for cross, but we didn't use it, so we're not seeking to admit it. Then I wanted to go back to one which I think I missed. This is CDFW 108. Just want to make sure that, yeah, okay. Yep, I think that's a complete list. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that very clear statement of the offer. With that, I will turn, you're once again first on my list, Ms. O'Sullivan, but we can come back around to you if you need to. But do you have any objections to the offer made by CDFW?
Sorry, can you come back around to me? Thank you.
Mr. Bivens, does CCRB have any objections to the offer made by CDFW?
So we'll assert a hearsay objection to CDFW 38, and maybe I can save us all some time and just say we'll be submitting hearsay objections to the draft BIOP, no matter which of the fisheries entities is offering it. So we'll make that a blanket standing hearsay objection. Beyond that, I have no further objections to CDFW's offer.
Okay, thank you.
Well, the city's already objected to that.
I will turn, I'll just go through one by one. Alisal Guest Ranch, do you have any objections to the offer by CDFW?
Yes, Alisal Guest Ranch will also be registering a hearsay objection to CDFW exhibit number 38.
Okay, thank you. And would you like to make that a blanket? Do you intend to make it a blanket objection as CCRB did to, regardless of which fisheries entity is offering the same exhibits, the draft 2016 biological opinion?
Yes, and we'll join, Alisal Guest Ranch would join in that blanket objection. And just for the record, I believe the NIMS exhibit number that is that identical draft is NIMS exhibit number 15.
Thank you. Do you have any other objections?
No.
Thank you. ID number 1. Do you have any objections to CDFW's offer?
Yes, ID number 1 also objects to CDFW 38 on the basis of hearsay, and we will be submitting written hearsay objections. And our objection extends also to the NIMS exhibits that are the draft 2016 biological opinion. So that's NIMS exhibit 15. And then there is an undated, unsigned copy of the draft biological opinion that is in the exhibit folder as NIMS exhibit 18 parentheses 1. That is not on the list of exhibits, but I want to flag that if the intent is to offer that exhibit into evidence, that our objection extends to that document as well.
Okay, thank you. We'll deal with that when we get to NIMS, but it's good to note for everyone that I may need to take a look at that. Thank you.
Thank you.
And then the parent district. Do you have objections to CDFW's offer?
It's nice to go last. Everyone else has already identified all the numbers. The same blanket objection to all the versions of the draft buyout.
Thank you. And then Ms. Beal, does NIMS have any objection to CDFW's offer?
No, no objections.
Thank you. And then Cal Trout.
No objection, Your Honor.
Thank you. And that means we are back to you, Ms. O'Sullivan. Do you need a moment, or are you ready to go?
Thank you. No, I'm ready to go now. Other than the city might, well, again, I'm going to reserve the same blanket hearsay objection to the 2016 BIOP documents. So that would go for CDFW, NIMS, and CalTrau because they all submitted it. But other than that, no, we don't. Or other than that, we also have one other hearsay objection for CDFW 67, but that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. So we have the hearsay objections are noted, and we will be getting those in writing. And with that, I've gone around the room, right? There are no other, I didn't miss anyone in terms of outstanding objections to CDFW's offer. All right, with that, I will accept CDFW's offer of its exhibits as described with the hearsay objections noted and the collateral estoppel objections still outstanding. And that includes official notice of CDFW 121 that's granted, and those exhibits are accepted into the evidentiary record.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, thank you, Mr. Pacini. I will move next to you, Ms. Beal, if I may.
Yep.
At this time, are you prepared to make an offer of, actually, give me a moment. I will be asking you in a moment. I should pull up my exhibits. That will help me. All right, at this time, with the notation that I issued procedural rulings this morning, that does exclude some limited portions of testimony offered by NIMFs. Given that notation, are you prepared to offer NIMFs exhibits into the record?
I am, but before I do that, I'd like to follow up on the question I think Ms. Esposito raised. I'm not sure what she was referring to, so I'd like to just make sure I'm aware of what that is. 18, there's something with an 18 and then a -1.
Let me see.
Okay.
It might be an error on our part, so let me see.
And I can elaborate on what I'm seeing if that's helpful.
And you're looking in the folder under the NIMS exhibits?
That's correct. I'm seeing in the files in that folder that there are 2 files titled NIMS 18 One is a April 25th, 2016 letter to Mitchell Moody. And the second, which is
I see it
titled
now.
2018 parentheses 1, is an undated, unsigned copy of the 2016 draft biological opinion that looks like it might have been erroneously updated or uploaded.
Ms. Beal, do you want to take, I see this, and I don't know if it was something that happened on our end or in NIMS's offer of the exhibits. Do you want to take a minute to, should we take a break so you can investigate what exactly this is? Would that help?
I think we can move ahead. I'm not sure what that is, but we were not relying on it. So
Okay.
I think we can just not include that document, and then I'll just make sure I've got everything else that I think is supposed to be in here. There we go. Okay. I feel like I have a pretty easy job compared to some of you. What I would like to move into evidence is NIMS exhibits 1 through 21 and exhibits 23 through 43. And for the record, I'm omitting NIMS exhibit 22 because, as people have noted, that was an inadvertent duplicate upload on our part that we were never able to figure out how to fix. So exhibit 22 is the duplicate of NIMS exhibit 16. So again, just to repeat, the offer is NIMS exhibits 1 through 21 and NIMS exhibits 23 through 43, not including NIMS 22 and not including NIMS-18 parens 1.
Great, thank you. All right, I will look, I'm going to do it again, Ms. O'Sullivan.
I'm ready this time.
Do you have any objections to NIMS offer of its exhibits?
Just that we're gonna lodge a hearsay objection to NIMS 16, 30, and 40.
Okay, thank you, and we will get those in writing. And then I will look to you, Mr. Bivens, does CCRB have any objections?
No, thank you.
And Alisal Guest Ranch?
No additional objections from Alisal Guest Ranch beyond our blanket objection to the draft biop already noted for the record.
Great, thank you. And then ID number 1.
The same for ID number 1. We would object to NIMS Exhibit 15, the 2016 draft biological opinion on the basis of hearsay.
Thank you. And the parent district.
I think my line is me too.
Thank you. And then Mr. Puccini, does CDFW have any objections?
We do not, thank you.
Thank you. And Caltrout?
No, Your Honor.
Thank you. So with that, subject to the here's objections. I'm sorry. Yes.
Sorry, Ms. Kinsey, if I may, I just wanted to clarify, I made that blanket hearsay objection for the 2016 biop as well, and I was remiss in saying NIMS 15 when for the city hearsay it would be NIMS 15, 16, 30, and 40, just to be complete.
Yes, thank you. Understood. So given the outstanding hearsay objections and given their objections based on collateral estoppel that are noted in my ruling of this morning, I will accept into the evidentiary record the offer of NIMS exhibits as it was just made. Thank you, Ms. Beal. And with that, I will turn to Cal Trout, I know we went through the exercise of making an offer earlier, but I think it makes sense to go ahead and do it again if you're prepared, Ms. Crope.
Yes.
Let me pull up my spreadsheet before I ask you to go through the numbers here. All right. Please, Ms. Crope, if you're prepared to make an offer of Cal Trout's exhibits, please go ahead.
Thank you. Yes, we would like to offer into exhibits Cal Trouts 1 and 2. Cal Trout 3, with the exception of paragraph 19 on page 12, lines 1 through 2 and 4 to 6. Those are pursuant to the rulings issued today. And then there are some other portions of Cal Trout 3 that are subject to the collateral estoppel determination. And I can cite those if you like. They were part of the ruling this morning.
No, thank you. I think those are noted well in the ruling, so you
Okay.
can, thank you.
And then we'd like to offer Cal Trouts 4 and 5, also subject to the determinations regarding collateral estoppel. And then we'd like to offer exhibits 6 through 15, 17 through 18, 20 through 33, 35, 38 through 54, 56 through 59, and for exhibit number 37, with the exception of paragraph 1, page 1, lines 5 through 9, subject to the order dated November 30th. And in that same order, there was a deferral of a determination on admissibility for paragraph 14, page 6, lines 11 through 13 and 14 through 17, based on the future cross-examination of Bill Trush. And we'd like to offer those portions of Cal Trout 37 into evidence, because that cross-examination has been completed. And I can also give you the cites to exhibits that provide foundation for his expert opinion on those two respects.
Thank you, Ms. Crope. I'm scrolling down here to see where we are. Ah, I see. I missed some of the deferred ruling in my ruling of this morning is I can say that about myself.
Could Ms. Croft just repeat the lines she's referring to in the rebuttal testimony?
Yes, it's Cal Trout 37. The deferred portions are paragraph 14, page 6, lines 11 through 13 and 14 through 17.
And that is noted, Ms. O'Sullivan, it's in our exhibit spreadsheet. I just missed it in my ruling of this morning. So those lines and everything are noted as deferred in the exhibit spreadsheet that's available to everyone.
Yes, thank you. wanted to make sure I was following along.
Yes, thank you.
Would you
So
like me to address those now, or?
I think what I'm going to do is probably take a quick break so I can refresh my memory and take a look at them. But one other matter of clarification that I wanted to make sure, I think you said you identified CalTrout 5 as potentially subject to a collateral estoppel objection. I just wanted to note, I don't think there's one outstanding with respect to CalTrout 5.
That's great, Your Honor.
At least my records don't show one
Okay,
that I see.
great. Then I withdraw that
That caveat.
qualification and offer Exhibit 5 into evidence.
Okay. So I think I would like to take about a 10-minute break for me, and I apologize. I think we're going to be able to finish up before lunch, which is why I'm going to push through here. And I apologize for missing that outstanding deferred objection. But before we break, are there any other matters of clarification on CalTrout's offer of exhibits that we should clean up? All right, it's 11:43. Let's come back at 11:53 and we'll see if we can get this done. Thank you very much for all your patience. I'll see you shortly. All right, it is 11:53, and once I see we have the relevant folks back online here, we'll get started. Thanks again for all of your patience on this. I did have a chance, we took a 10-minute break. I had a chance to look at the outstanding objections to exhibit 37 that were deferred and I had not ruled upon in my ruling letter this morning. And I acknowledge, Ms. Crope, your offer to provide further information in response to those objections. I'm going to just go ahead and rule on the issue because I am going to overrule those objections. So I think there's no need here. I'm overruling the objections on the basis, I think these, as with most of my responses here, they go to the weight to be afforded the testimony, and don't rise to the level of admissibility. I think the both matters of testimony highlight contested issues of fact that are ones that are before the AHO and the board, but those contested issues are noted and can be the basis for the expert's opinion. And I will issue a brief written ruling in the same way I did with the others so that you have a record of that ruling and the basis for it. So what I'll do is, instead of issuing what I called a formatted version of the ruling, I'm going to call it a revised ruling that will come out this afternoon and will reflect a written ruling on CalTrout Exhibit 37 so that we have a complete record of those. So you can expect to see that later today. With that resolution of the outstanding issue on Exhibit 37, and noting that paragraph 1 does have portions of the testimony excluded, I will go around the room with respect to CalTrout's offer of its exhibits. I will turn to you first, Ms. O'Sullivan. Does Solvang have objections to CalTrout's offer?
Yes, we'd like to lodge hearsay objections to, again, for the draft BIOP, which is CalTrout 5, and then also to CalTrout 12, 22, 29, 30, 31, 32, 33, 39, 41, 46, and 51.
All right, I'm going to repeat that just to make sure I have that down here. Solvang is lodging hearsay objections to CalTrout 5, 12, 22, 29, 30, 31, 32, 39, 41, 46, and 51.
I think the only one you missed was 33.
33, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I'll continue. Mr. Bivens, does CCRB have any objections to CalTrout's offer?
No additional objections from CCRB. Thank you.
Thank you. Alisal Guest Ranch.
No additional objections from Alisal Guest Ranch beyond our standing objection to the offer of the 2016 draft biological opinion.
Thank you. ID number 1.
And we also object to CalTrout 5, the 2016 draft biological opinion, and we'll be submitting written hearsay objections.
Thank you. The parent district.
Same, no further objections, but we do have that hearsay objection.
Thank you. Ms. Beal for NIMS, do you have any objections?
No objections.
Thank you. And Mr. Puccini for CDFW.
No objections, thank you.
Thank you. So with the noted hearsay objections that will be coming in writing, as well as the outstanding objections on collateral estoppel, which Ms. Crope noted in her offer, I will accept the offer of CalTrout's exhibits into the evidentiary record. Thank you, Ms.
Your Honor.
I believe that leaves us with the last item on the list, and I'll go around the room before we close, but the last item is the AHO exhibits. We had not talked about in much detail how we were going to handle those. My inclination is simply to offer them all into the evidentiary record and see if you have any well, maybe I'll ask you first whether you have any objections, but let me identify them first for our record. And just for the record here, the AHO exhibits are exhibits that the AHO identified in an exhibit list. For convenience, these were documents that were in the administrative record for the proceeding as related background. And for convenience, we identified those as AHO exhibits. I'm sorry, my Excel is not working. Give me a moment, please.
1 through 49.
Thank you. As AHO exhibits 1 through 49, with a notation that there's an AHO 40B. It's a 40B because we added it later, but it is related to AHO 40. So there are actually 50 AHO exhibits. And with that identification, it looks like Mr. Bivens is going to have something to say. So I will turn to you first, just because you're off mute. Mr. Bivens, did you have any comments or, well, do you have any objections to the acceptance of these documents into the evidentiary record?
No, I just forgot to put myself back on mute.
Okay. Ms. O'Sullivan, do you have any objections? I'll just go around the room. Do you have any objections to the admission of these exhibits?
No, the city does not have any objections to the AHO exhibits.
Thank you. And then I will continue through the list, which I've misplaced. There we go. Alisal Guest Ranch.
No objections from Alisal Guest Ranch.
Thank you. ID number 1.
No objections. Thank you.
And the parent district.
No objections.
And nymphs.
No objections, thanks.
Thank you. Caltrout.
No objections.
Thank you. And CDFW.
No objections, thank you.
Thank you very much. With that, I will accept into the evidentiary record AHO exhibits 1 through 49, including AHO 40 and AHO 40B. That is the end of my agenda for this hearing and our time together today. Before we close, I will look to the room. Are there any other outstanding? I will note that closing briefs are due on February 15th. If I'm remembering correctly, I did outline page limitations for those in my most recent ruling. I believe it was December 29th. So that is available and font size and such. Those will be once those are submitted, we will transfer those over to the AHO FTP site so you can all see them there. But are there any other procedural issues that we need to address today? Please feel free to go off mute and let me know. All right. Well, with that, I do want to thank all of you for what I think was a very smooth hearing. I know we had a number of days together, and I really appreciate all of your professionalism and working through the issues. And I think a genuine engagement from your experts on understanding these complicated issues. And I really appreciate your assistance in this proceeding. It is my intent that after we receive closing briefs, the AHO will put out a draft of a proposed ruling. So you will have a chance to comment on it before we actually submit a recommended order to the board. So I find that to be very helpful. It's really to help us, identify areas where you may disagree with the AHO's findings of facts or legal determinations, but also just to identify areas where we may have missed something. It's really quite helpful. So that it is my intent certainly to issue a draft so you have a chance to comment then, and then you will have a follow-up chance to comment once we submit a recommended decision to the board to comment on that recommended decision as well. So I wanted to put that out there in terms of expectations. And with that, thank you very much. I believe we are adjourned, and this hearing, the evidentiary records is closed, but the matter is not submitted until we receive closing briefs, and that's expected on February 15th. Thank you.
Thank you, Officer Kinsey.
Thank you, Officer Kinsey.
Thank you
Very much.